My family demanded the $18,000 I saved working 2 years for college. They lied about what the money was for, kicked me out when I confronted them. But my sister and millionaire uncle got revenge in a way my parents will never forget. I'm 18 years old. I just graduated high school a few months ago, and I still can't believe my life got completely turned upside down like this. I worked since I was 16 to save for college. Like, every weekend, every summer, sacrificing going out with friends and all that. And it turns out my own parents thought it was totally reasonable to ask me to give all that money to my older sister. And when I say they asked me, they actually demanded it. Like it was my obligation, you know? But let me start from the beginning, because this story is more complicated than it seems. I grew up in a small neighborhood where everyone knows each other. One of those places where if your neighbor sneezes 3 houses down, you find out the next day. My dad, Michael, was always a hardworking guy, very concerned about what people thought of our family, like obsessed with keeping up appearances that everything was perfect. My mom, Susan, never worked outside the home. She dedicated herself to being a housewife and basically supported everything my dad said or did. I have an older sister, Victoria, who's 22 now, and if I'm honest, our relationship was always kind of complicated. When we were younger, she was super bossy with me, like older sister bullying taken to the extreme, you know. She'd make fun of me, make me feel bad about anything, and my parents always said it was just sibling stuff, that it was normal. I avoided her as much as possible. Honestly, things in my family always seemed normal. I mean, we had enough. We weren't rich, but we didn't lack anything either. My dad worked at a company and earned well, enough for my mom to stay home and for Victoria to go to college without having to work, which always seemed unfair to me because when I started talking about college, like at 15, my dad told me he wasn't going to be able to pay for everything and that I needed to start saving if I wanted to go to a good school. I remember that conversation perfectly because it hurt. You know? Seeing that my sister had everything paid for and I had to figure it out myself. But whatever. I didn't say anything. I guess I thought that's just how life was. So I started working when I turned 16. Got a job at an electronics store. Nothing special. I earned like $8 an hour, but it was something. I worked every Saturday and Sunday, and in the summer I'd take weekday shifts too. My friends would go out to parties, go to the movies, make plans all the time, and I was working. I missed a ton of things, honestly, but I had a clear goal. I wanted to go to college and study engineering, and I knew I needed at least like $15,000 saved for the first year. My parents never congratulated me for working or anything. It was like they took it for granted. Like, oh yeah, Ethan is saving for college, that's nice. Everything changed when COVID hit in early 2020. I was 16, almost 17, and suddenly the world stopped. My dad, I don't know what got into his head, but he decided it was the perfect time to quit his job and start his own business. To this day, I don't understand the logic. In the middle of a global pandemic, with everything closed and people losing jobs, my dad thought it was a good idea to take that risk. My mom supported him completely, as always, said it was a unique opportunity, that my dad had always dreamed of having his own business. My sister Victoria was in her last year of college, living in an apartment near campus that my parents paid for. And I kept working when I could, though the hours were reduced a lot because of the restrictions. My dad's business was a disaster from the start. It was something related to importing products. I don't remember exactly what, but basically he invested all his savings and borrowed money from his older brother, my uncle Benjamin, who's always been like the successful one in the family, has his own consulting company and does really well. My uncle lent him the money without thinking much about it, because he's one of those people who help family without hesitation, but the business never took off. Products didn't arrive on time because of the pandemic, customers canceled orders, everything was chaos. By the end of 2020, my parents were in serious financial trouble, but they never told us anything. At least not directly. I noticed it because my mom started buying cheaper brands at the supermarket. We stopped going out to dinner on weekends like before. My dad was always stressed and in a bad mood. Victoria graduated in May 2021, came back home because she couldn't find a job, and my parents kept paying for her apartment because, according to them, she needed that space to look for work peacefully. I was thinking, really? I mean, the 1-year-old girl who never worked a day in her life needs her own paid apartment to look for a job? But I, at 16, already had to work to pay for my college. But, whatever. It wasn't my problem, I guess. I kept working. By then I had switched to a better job at a restaurant where I earned like $12 an hour plus tips, and my savings kept growing. I had everything in a savings account in my name. My parents didn't even ask how much I had. They never showed real interest. Things kept getting worse for my parents during 2021 and early 2022. My dad's business basically went bankrupt. He had to close it, lost all the money he had invested, and on top of that, he owed money to my Uncle Benjamin. My dad got another normal job, but he earned less than before, and my mom had to start looking for work too, something she hadn't done since before I was born. She found a part-time job at an office, nothing special. Victoria finally got a job in marketing, something related to her degree, but she didn't earn much, like entry-level salary, and my parents kept helping her with the apartment. I graduated high school in June 2022. I had just turned 18, and I had managed to save almost $18,000. I was super proud of myself, honestly, because it was a lot of effort, a lot of lost weekends, but I had done it. I had already applied and been accepted to an out-of-state university, a really good technical school for engineering, and I was ready to start in August. My parents never asked about my application process, never helped me with anything. It was like my education didn't really matter to them. But I was used to doing things on my own, so I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me was what happened like 2 weeks after my graduation. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was in my room packing some things for college because I like to organize ahead of time, and my parents called me to the living room. I went down thinking maybe they wanted to talk about my move or something like that, but no. My dad was sitting on the couch with that serious face he makes when he's about to drop something important, and my mom was next to him with her arms crossed. They told me to sit down, and I obeyed, kind of confused. My dad started with how they needed to talk about something important, that the family was going through difficult financial times, which I already knew. And then he dropped the bomb. I said that Victoria needed help with her apartment payment this month because they couldn't cover the full rent, and that they thought I should help. I stayed quiet for a few seconds, processing what I had just heard. Help? How exactly? My dad said, "Well, we know you've been saving for college, and that's very good, but Victoria is your sister and family helps each other. We need you to give her the money for her rent this month." I asked how much it was, and my mom said like $1,200. $1,200 of the $18,000 I had killed myself saving. I tried to stay calm and said, "But that's my money for college. I need it for tuition and books and all that." My dad interrupted me and said I could get a student loan. That's what they existed for. But that Victoria needed the money right now or they were going to evict her. I couldn't believe it. Literally, I just sat there thinking, is this really happening? I asked why Victoria couldn't get a loan or why she couldn't move back home and save the rent, and my dad got furious, started yelling about how I dared to suggest that Victoria needed her space because she was starting her professional career, that I was selfish and only thought about myself. My mom joined in saying she never thought her son would be so insensitive to his own sister. That family is the most important thing, that I was still very young and could work while studying to recover that money. I told them no, that it was my money, that I had earned it working for years, and that it wasn't my responsibility to support my two-year-old sister who had a job. The argument escalated horribly. My dad yelled at me that as long as I lived under his roof, I had to follow his rules, that he was my father and I owed him respect, that after everything they had done for me, it was the least I could do. I yelled back at him, something I had never done before, told him they never did anything for my education, that Victoria had everything paid for and I had nothing, that this was totally unfair. My mom started crying, saying I was killing her with disgust. How could I talk to them like that? My dad got up from the couch, pointed his finger at me and said, "You have two options. Either you give the money to your sister or you leave this house. It's that simple." I froze. Was he really kicking me out of the house for not giving my college money to my sister? I looked at my mom waiting for her to say something, to defend me, but she just cried and looked away. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach, you know? That moment when you realize your parents really don't value you the same as your sibling. I got up, went to my room, and started packing my things in a big suitcase and a backpack. My hands were shaking with rage, And also, I'm not gonna lie, I felt like crying, but I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I came down like 20 minutes later with my stuff. My parents were still in the living room. My dad saw me and said, "So, what's your decision?" I told him, "I'm leaving." And my mom screamed, "You can't leave, you're a minor." But my dad shut her up and said, "He's 18, he can do whatever he wants. Let him go see how he does alone in the world." I walked to the door, opened it, and before leaving I told them, "I'm never going to forget this, never." My dad yelled something about me being ungrateful, but I didn't hear well anymore because I closed the door behind me. I stood on the street, in front of my house with a suitcase and a backpack. Like, now what? I took out my phone, and the only thing I could think of was to call my Uncle Benjamin. He and my aunt, Catherine, his wife, had always been nice to me. They lived like 30 minutes away. My uncle answered on the second ring. I explained quickly what had happened, and he just said, "Stay. There, I'm coming for you." He didn't ask questions, didn't judge me, just said he was coming. He arrived like 40 minutes later in his truck, helped me load my stuff, and during the drive to his house, he only asked, "Are you okay?" I told him yes, although clearly I wasn't. My Aunt Catherine greeted me with a hug, made me something to eat, and they told me I could stay in their guest room as long as I needed. That night, lying in a bed that wasn't mine, in a house that wasn't mine, I started to cry. All the anger and sadness I had been holding back came out at once. I couldn't understand how my parents had chosen my sister's apartment over my education, over me. I felt betrayed, humiliated, rejected by my own family. The next few days were weird. My uncle and aunt didn't ask much. They just made sure I was okay. My mom sent me like 3 text messages saying I was overreacting, to come back home and let's talk like adults, but I didn't even respond. My dad didn't send anything. Victoria didn't communicate with me either, which bothered me because I thought, at least she could say something, right? But nothing. Like a week passed, and I was still angry, thinking about everything that had happened over and over in my head, and then I did something I probably shouldn't have done, but at the time, it seemed right. I wrote a long Facebook post telling the whole story. I explained how I had worked since I was 16, how much I had saved, how my parents paid for everything for Victoria but nothing for me, and how they had kicked me out of the house for not giving my college money to my sister. I didn't use super dramatic language or anything. I just told the facts as they happened. I posted it thinking maybe some friends would give me their support or something. I didn't expect what happened next. The post blew up. Within hours I had hundreds of reactions and comments. Relatives I didn't even know were on my Facebook started commenting. Uncles, cousins, my parents, friends, everyone giving their opinion. Most were on my side, saying my parents were totally wrong, that it was my money and no one could force me to give it, that kicking your 8-year-old son out for that was horrible. Some defended my parents, saying family should help each other, but they were the minority. My dad called me like 3 hours after I posted that. He was furious, yelling at me how I dared to expose the family like that publicly. To delete that post immediately, or I was going to regret it. I hung up on him. My mom also called me, crying, saying people in the neighborhood were looking at her weird, that her friends were asking her if all that was true, that I was destroying the family's reputation. I told her they destroyed our relationship first, and I hung up on her too. I received like 20 messages from relatives, some supporting me, others criticizing my parents, some saying we were all wrong. It was total chaos. My uncle asked me about the post. I explained why I did it, and he just sighed and said he understood my frustration, but maybe it wasn't the best way to handle it. The next day, I kept receiving messages and comments. A cousin of my dad's commented something about how families should keep their problems private, and someone else replied that my parents should have thought about that before kicking out their son. It was a complete circus. But then I started to notice something. Many of the supportive comments were superficial, like, "That sucks for you," but nobody actually offered concrete help, you know? It was all moral indignation show, but no real action. I realized deep down people liked the drama, but didn't really care about me or my parents. After like 3 days, I decided to delete the post. Not because my parents asked me to, But because I realized I wasn't achieving anything good, my parents were still mad at me. I was still mad at them. And now the whole family was involved in the drama too. I deleted the post and blocked comments on anything related to the topic. Messages kept coming for a couple more days, but eventually, people got bored and moved on to other drama. Like a week after I deleted the post, my Aunt Catherine came looking for me one afternoon. I was in the guest room watching something on my laptop, and she knocked on the door, came in, and sat on the bed with me. She asked how I was, and I told her the truth, that I was still angry but calmer now, and that I felt guilty about all the drama I had caused. She told me something I didn't expect. She said, "Ethan, there's something you need to know about what happened." I asked what she meant, and she told me that 2 days after my parents kicked me out, my Uncle Benjamin had gone to talk to them. And during that conversation, he found out they had asked Victoria for $1,200 for her rent. My uncle asked my dad why he hadn't told him. Victoria needed help, that he would gladly lend her the money, and my dad got all nervous. It turns out my uncle and aunt had already given Victoria the money for her rent before my parents asked me for it. Victoria had called my uncle, asking for help, desperately saying my parents couldn't help her that month, and my uncle transferred the money immediately without telling my parents anything because he wanted Victoria to feel independent. So, when my parents asked me for money for Victoria's rent, the rent was already paid. My parents had lied to me. They didn't need my money for my sister's rent. They needed it for them, for their own expenses or to pay other debts, and they used Victoria as an excuse. I was in total shock. I mean, I knew my parents were financially desperate, but lying to me like that, using my sister as an excuse, and then kicking me out of the house for not giving them my money, that was another level. I asked my aunt if Victoria knew my parents had done that, and she said she didn't think so. That Victoria probably thought my parents had given her the money. My uncle had decided not to tell Victoria anything to avoid causing more problems, but they felt I deserved to know the truth. That night, I couldn't sleep, thinking about everything. I felt validated in my decision not to give them the money, but I also felt worse because it confirmed my parents had really used and manipulated me. The next day, I did something I should have done from the beginning. I called Victoria. She answered, kind of surprised. We hadn't talked since before all the drama. I asked her directly, "Did you ask Mom and Dad to ask me for money for your rent?" There was silence on the other end, and then she said, "What are you talking about?" I told her the whole story, how they asked me for $1,200, supposedly for her rent, how they kicked me out when I refused. Everything. Victoria stayed quiet for a good while, and then said, "Ethan, I never knew anything about that. I asked Uncle Ben for money because Mom and Dad told me they couldn't help me that month. But I never asked them to ask you for money. I didn't even know they had kicked you out of the house." Her voice sounded genuinely surprised and even upset. I asked, "You really didn't know?" And she said no, that our parents never mentioned anything to her about asking me for money. I told her what my aunt had told me, that Uncle Ben had given her the money before they kicked me out, and Victoria started crying. She said, "I can't believe they used my situation to manipulate you. That's horrible, Ethan. I'm so sorry. That conversation changed everything between my sister and me. We stayed talking for like 2 hours, and for the first time in years we really talked like siblings. She apologized for how she had treated me when we were younger, admitted she had been a terrible sister, that she was jealous of me because I was always more independent and responsible. She told me things I didn't know, like that our parents always compared her to me in private, telling her why couldn't she be more like me, more hardworking, more dedicated. She said for years she hated me for that, but when she went to college and started maturing, she realized the problem wasn't with me but with how our parents managed both of us. I told her about all the years I worked, about how I felt when they paid for everything for her and nothing for me, and she told me something that surprised me. She said she hadn't had things as easy as they seemed either, that yes, our parents paid for her college, but there was a lot of pressure and expectations, that she had to study what they wanted, live where they decided, do what they approved of, that basically she had sold her freedom for her education. She told me she envied me because I was free to do whatever I wanted, that I had managed to become independent from them in a way she never could. It was weird to hear that, because I always thought she had everything better. At the end of that conversation, we both came to the same conclusion. Our parents had manipulated both of us for years, creating competition and resentment between us to distract us from seeing how they really were. Victoria told me that after finding out what they did to me, she was also reconsidering her relationship with them. She promised me she was going to confront them about all this, and I told her she didn't have to do it for me, but she insisted she was doing it for herself too. The next few weeks were calmer. Victoria confronted our parents, and according to what she told me later, they denied everything at first, then admitted they had asked their son for money, but it was because they were desperate and that I had exaggerated everything. Victoria told them what they did was wrong, that lying about what they needed the money for was unforgivable, and that kicking me out of the house was abusive. My parents told her she was taking my side without knowing the whole story, that I had humiliated them publicly with that Facebook post, that I had damaged the family reputation. Victoria responded that they had damaged the family long before that post, and that until they apologized to me and admitted what they did, she was going to keep her distance from them. My mom tried to call me several times after that, but I didn't answer. Finally, she sent me a long text message saying she was sorry about how they had handled things, that they were under a lot of financial stress and made bad decisions, but that I had also been wrong to expose them publicly and to refuse to help the family. It wasn't exactly an apology, it was more like, "We all screwed up, but you too, you know?" I didn't respond. My dad never apologized or really tried to contact me. August came, and it was time to go to college. My uncle and aunt helped me with everything, took me in their truck with all my stuff, helped me settle into the dorm, gave me extra money for emergencies. They were more parents to me in those 2 months than my own parents had been in years. Victoria also came to say goodbye the day before I left. She hugged me, cried a little, and told me to keep in touch, that we were going to rebuild our relationship as real siblings, without the toxicity of our parents in between. I promised her I would. My first semester in college was emotionally weird. On one hand, I was super excited to be there, studying what I wanted, meeting new people, having that college experience I had worked so hard to get. But on the other hand, I had this constant weight of everything that had happened with my family. I blocked my parents on social media and on my phone after my dad sent me a message in October saying I had disappointed the family and that until I apologized and learned to respect my parents, he didn't want to know anything about me. It was like the last straw, you know? They lied to me, manipulated me, kicked me out of the house, and I had to apologize. I blocked him, and it was liberating, honestly. Victoria and I talked often on the phone. She told me our parents were still in financial trouble, that her relationship with them was super tense, that they basically only talked about superficial things because any important topic ended in a fight. In November, Victoria made the decision to cut contact with them too, at least temporarily. She told me she needed space to heal from all the damage they had caused her over the years, and that being close to them only made her feel worse. I completely supported that decision. My uncle Benjamin told me like a month ago that my parents are asking him for more money, that my dad's job isn't going well and they're behind on several payments. My uncle told them he would help them, but with conditions, that they needed to go to financial and family therapy, that they needed to admit their mistakes and work on fixing relationships with their children. According to my uncle, my dad got angry and told him he didn't need advice on how to manage his family, and that either he lent them money without conditions or didn't lend them anything. My uncle chose not to lend them more money. Part of me felt bad for them, but another part thought, this is a consequence of their own decisions. Now I'm halfway through my second semester. I'm still 18. I work part-time on campus to have extra money, and I'm getting good grades. My sister and I talk every 2 weeks or so, sometimes more, and our relationship is better than it ever was when we lived in the same house. It's weird how something as horrible as what happened ended up bringing my sister and me closer together and separating us from our parents. I don't know if I'll ever forgive my parents for what they did. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe with time, maybe never. For now, I'm focused on my future, on building the life I want, and on maintaining the relationships that are worthwhile. Last week, my mom asked my uncle for my new number because I changed numbers a few months ago, and my uncle asked me if he could give it to her. I told him no, that if she wanted to contact me, she had to do it through Victoria or through him, but that I wasn't ready to talk directly with her. My uncle respected my decision. I don't know what's going to happen in the future with my family. I guess time will tell. For now, I'm good where I am, surrounded by people who really support me, working toward my goals, and learning that sometimes the family you choose is more important than the family you got by blood.